On today's episode of Locked on Wild, the Minnesota Wild are linked to who in trade discussions? Plus, Brendan Gaunce makes his debut against the Panthers tonight.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by the College Football Playoffs. The College Football Playoff is here, and you don't want to miss a moment of the action. The College Football Playoff presented by Allstate begins with 4 first-round games, December 20th and 21st on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we'll talk about a recent linking of New York Rangers forward Kaapo Kakko to the Minnesota Wild. We'll see what that does just from a temperature check perspective for the Minnesota Wild. We'll also take a look today at some good numbers for Liam Ogren over the past few weeks. And we'll get you set for tonight's game as we take a look at Brendan Gaunce, who's making his debut tonight. We'll hear from Brendan Gaunce ahead of his Minnesota Wild debut as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked on Wild since 2021 and credentialed media member. And we're going to start right off the bat. Trade winds a-blowing as we have this tweet from our good friend Johnny Lazarus. On ESPN Plus, Emily Kaplan mentioned that Kaapo Kakko is getting a lot of attention from teams in the West, specifically the Minnesota Wild. And Johnny goes on to say, I honestly think he would be a perfect fit there. Before we dive into what exactly Kaapo Kakko would bring to the table, this was completely shot out of the sky by Michael Russo in a pretty funny fashion. He was straight up asked, any truth to the Wild being in on Kakko at all? He quote tweeted it and said, no. So much for that, but let's just for fun look at the player that Kaapo Kakko is. And why would the New York Rangers be looking to get rid of a 23-year-old at this point in their season? They're kind of just listing through the year. Very underwhelming season for the New York Rangers. Their GM recently said, hey, we're open for business. And if you want to get something done, let's go ahead and try to make it happen. Kakko right now, 4 goals, 10 assists, 14 total points in 30 games. He is a +9 in the 30 games, is playing about 13 minutes, just over 13 minutes per night on the ice, and he has 45 shots on goal in 30 games. Now, some of the underlying metrics for Kakko, he is at right at 50% in the faceoff circle. Not a ton of attempts, 32 wins, 32 losses. He's got 23 hits in 30 games, and not a ton as far as power play goes. He does have a power play goal and a power play assist, so mostly a primary scorer. 84 total shot attempts in 30 games. The metrics that I like to look at to kind of determine individual performance is, of course, point shares. And so far this year, Kaapo Kakko has a 1.5 defensive point shares and 0.6 offensive point shares through the first 30 games of the season, which would put him, it would put him a little lower than Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin so far this season for the Minnesota Wild. So he would actually, I think, be one of the better forwards in terms of point shares defensively this year. Just pulling the numbers up now to look at where he would rank. As far as point shares go, 2.2 would put him just ahead of Joel Eriksson Ek, just behind Freddie Gaudreau. So right about middle of the pack in terms of point shares on a team-wide basis. The defensive point shares of 1.5 would actually put him inside the top 10, just behind Marco Rossi. So he brings some good defensive value, but beyond that, his career high in goals is 18, which was 2 years ago in 2022-2023 for the New York Rangers. That was obviously a Rangers team that had it was a Rangers team that had a pretty good year. Last year they were very, very good, and this year not good at all. So had some decent success, and when he scored the 18 goals and had 40 points in 82 games, he was playing about 15 minutes a night. His numbers, his minutes have dropped to now playing much more of a bottom six role on this Rangers team than anything else. And I'm just going to be blunt. I'm going to be honest here. He's a young player, sure, 23 years old, and obviously has not gotten a ton of chance in a very veteran-heavy New York Rangers lineup. But I don't know if he would be good enough. I don't know if he is a type of player that would benefit from a change of scenery enough to be able to elevate into a top six role, or if he would just settle into that middle area like everybody else has. Because that's the problem right now for the Minnesota Wild, is that they have a large amount of players that are probably more like third line players and very few that are true top six. There's just this line, and there are a bunch of players that are like here, and there are what the Wild need for that second line is up here. So anytime you elevate somebody into that second line, they're going a little bit over their head as far as what they're able to do to produce and make that work. And I just don't think that Kaapo Kakko would be somebody that could elevate to that level. So this, I think, and obviously it's a moot point because Michael Russo just completely just torched it. But it is interesting. Like, if that is what you are looking for, if that's the type of player that you are targeting, I would set the sights just a little bit above that. It is perfectly reasonable to think that a player like Kaapo Kakko would benefit from a change of scenery and maybe turn into a reliable top six piece. But I would just rather let somebody else take the chance and have it potentially not work out as opposed to the Minnesota Wild. Now, from a contract perspective, I think this is the reason that the Minnesota Wild were quote unquote linked to Kaapo Kakko. He is a restricted free agent next season. $2.4 million on his contract this year. So it's a very affordable contract to put on the books. But a player in Kakko who doesn't seem to be gelling with the New York Rangers at this point. High expectations, I'm sure, for him. Hasn't necessarily been able to hit those marks. And it's a Rangers team that is feeling a ton of pressure to try to get back to the level of performance they've been at for the last few years. So I'm glad Russo shot this down, because I would have been, scale of 1 to 10, like if there was actual steam to this, I probably would have been at about a 3.5. And this is what I try to do with a lot of links, like trade links, trade rumors, is just give like initial reaction to it right off the top. Opinions can certainly change, but I would really have to be talked into this. Thankfully, it doesn't sound like it's going to happen, but trade season always leads to some interesting speculation. And so this is one that I think we can be probably pretty happy that the Wild are not linked to very seriously, because I think the sights are still set on a little higher class of targets before the trade deadline. We're going to do for our second episode here today, we're going to do a things to consider for the Minnesota Wild as they get closer to the trade deadline. What are the key factors to watch for? What do the Wild have available that they could send to another team at the deadline? And what sorts of roles are they looking to fill? So trade deadline, things to consider is your second episode here today before tonight's game. We got a late one, so we got plenty of time to get a couple of episodes in here. But no on Kaapo Kakko is my official stance here from Locked On Wild. Now, when we come back, we will talk about a player who lots of fans are clamoring to see, and he is certainly doing his part to try to make that happen. We will talk about how Liam Ogren has been doing down in Iowa as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments, just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it is completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. Redeem points towards flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments. With over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program, the possibilities are endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. The best part about Built is using points for travel. Built makes it so easy to turn rent into rewards. If you're already paying rent, why not make it work for you? Start earning points on rent you've already been paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. Make sure to use our link so they know we sent you. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is also brought to you by Select Quote. The World Series, the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. Select Quote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. Select Quote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. You invest so much time to take care of yourself and to be the healthiest, best version of you. Select Quote's exclusive policies can reward that effort. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Go to selectquote.com/lockedonnhl today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Once again, no postcast tonight. Late one. It's just this is just going to be the new reality, is that these games that start around 9:30, unless it's a weekend game, there's not going to be a postcast. So no postcast tonight, but we'll certainly have reaction for you tomorrow, recapping the game tonight against the Panthers. I wanted to talk a little bit about Liam Ogren, because it's no secret that there is a little bit of a rut on the second line for the Minnesota Wild from a scoring perspective. And whether it be a trade, whether it be some other acquisition, whether it be a promotion, there are many calls for particular players to hop up and help out the big club. And one player in particular who made the team out of camp, but was sent down to Iowa just to work on some things, is Liam Ogren. His first game down with the Iowa Wild was November 2nd. He scored in his second game of the season. Then a scoreless game on the 7th. He had 3 goals against Rockford on the 9th. Followed that up with a goal on the 22nd after a little bit of time at the NHL level. Goal and an assist on the 22nd. 2 more goals on December 7th, followed by a single goal on the 8th. And again, what is it with these teams just destroying Rockford? A 2-goal, 1-assist performance by Liam Ogren last night against Rockford. And he now sits at 10 goals and 4 assists, 14 total points in 14 games played for the Iowa Wild. And especially since December 7th, since the calendar flipped to December, that is 8 goals for Ogren, or 8 points, I should say, and 5 goals. 5 goals in a 6-game span. And it's starting to really look, I think, like the Wild were hoping it would. It's similar to what happened with Marco Rossi in his first stint at the AHL level. Now, obviously, it didn't get prolonged as much as Rossi's did. But Ogren just looked tentative in the NHL lineup. Just wasn't necessarily sure of himself. John Hines mentioned in a couple of different instances, these young kids just go out and play their game. Don't worry about the results. Just go make plays to impact the outcome. And we'll take things after that. Like strictly from an evaluation standpoint, it just wasn't where the Wild wanted it to be. So he got sent down, and really seems like he's starting to hone things in. From a shots on goal perspective, since December 7th, he's gone 3 shots, 2 shots, 4 shots, 3 shots, 4 shots, 5 shots on goal. And for somebody who is, you would expect, is one of the top options in that Iowa lineup right now, you want him to be the one or one of the key players taking a bunch of the shots to try to help his team out. And I don't know what the future holds for this Minnesota Wild team. I will just repeat what I've said over the last few weeks, that it's pretty clear that the Minnesota Wild wanted Liam to work on some things and just want him to get the opportunity to do that without the pressure of having to, well, I'm not going to get called up unless I do this. The Wild have been elevating particular players into the top 6. Obviously, with Matt Zuccarello back now, that has certainly helped the top 6. Still needs that 6th piece, obviously, but getting Matt Zuccarello back has helped. Joel Eriksson-Ek reportedly has started skating on his own, which is a very good sign that he's starting to ramp up for a return. Once Eriksson-Ek comes back, you've got Boldy and you've got Eriksson-Ek on that second line. Just depends entirely on what you get from that second line experience. And I know he's been dogged quite a bit. Marcus Johansson is mixing in effective games far more frequently than he did last year, which there were 40 plus, I think it was, that I would just consider not even remotely. But if we look at the Johansson shot counter for the last several games, if ESPN would let me get to it. Johansson has recorded at least a shot in every game this month. He had 5 shots in the game against Vegas. Couple shots with the goal and 2 assists against Utah. Had 2 shots on goal in the game against the Los Angeles Kings. Single shots in the other games. And so those are those spots that you kind of, you need to see more. And this is outside of the penalty kill. It's the biggest enigma about this current team is that other wing spot on the second line. And whether it be Brock Besser coming in at some point between now and the trade deadline, whether it be Liam Ogren continuing his just torrential pace down in Iowa, whether it be Marcus Johansson being a little more consistent, somebody is going to need to step into that second line role and make that thing a consistent producer. We've seen it against Winnipeg. We saw it against Vegas. We saw it against Dallas. We will, I'm sure, see it against Colorado and the others. Is the MO to beat this team is if you have a couple of good defensive lines or a couple of physical forward lines or even a couple of top scoring lines. You just got to neutralize the Kaprizov line and you're probably sitting pretty. So second wing on the second line is the current, we have to get this ironed out objective for this team, other than the penalty kill. But we've, of course, been talking about that for more than the last couple of seasons. So, and I will reiterate this point as well, because I know there have been calls for, well, how come there haven't been any moves made? How come we haven't seen the New York Islanders open up for business as of now? This is the reason, is because right now the New York Islanders, now it was the last time I checked, the Islanders were 1 point out of a playoff spot. They're now 3 points out of a playoff spot. So still close enough to be in striking distance. And it doesn't even have to necessarily be Brock Besser specifically. Take your pick as to whatever trade target you want for this Minnesota Wild team, whoever it may be, because we know Bill Guerin has names that are not public that are on his list as well. But whoever it may be, that team has to kind of fall out of the race in order for players to be available. Too bad there's nobody on Buffalo you could go get, because Buffalo has lost 11 games in a row. They're definitively out of it. And we were just talking about on the national show, feels like the Buffalo Sabres need to make they need a spark. They need to make something happen to try to revive themselves. And that would be one team where if you wanted to go get somebody from the Sabres, you could probably go do that now, because they are in an absolute tailspin. Go get Tage Thompson. I'm only semi-joking. Go get Tage Thompson and add him to the mix and see what happens there. Or go get Dylan Cousins or somebody like that. That would be a team that you can make a trade with right now. But the rest, until they fall out of the playoff race enough that they are comfortable making moves and comfortable kind of calling the dogs off, you're going to have to fill from within. But the teams that are settling to the bottom are starting to become more and more defined. Nashville is another one. You could go get somebody from the Predators if you really wanted to, because that is a team that does not show any signs of stopping the mess. They're finally winning, but they had lost 8 in a row. Just a disaster. So if you want targets from a couple of the other teams that are closer in the playoff race, it's going to take longer for it to get done. That's just kind of the ebb and flow of the season. But second line wing is a spot to circle. That's going to need a little bit of an upgrade for this Wild team once the playoffs come knocking. Now tonight, a new player will be making his Minnesota Wild debut And we'll get to know Brendan Gaunce a little bit, what he brings to the table, and why he can bring a little versatility to the Minnesota Wild here this evening. That is coming up as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. And once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to join us for our second episode here today. We're going to give you the things to consider for the Minnesota Wild as they navigate the trade market. So should be a fun one here as we get you closer to a late puck drop tonight. They say it's supposed to be 8:30, but it's a national game. It's going to be closer to 9 just from prior experience. So get your coffee ready, and it's going to be a late night tonight. But we did learn that Brendan Gaunce is going to be making his Minnesota Wild debut here in this one tonight. And Gaunce with a nice recent display for the Iowa Wild, including a hat trick in the game on December 11th against Rockford. Again, it's Rockford. 3 goals for Gaunce in that game. He also scored against Milwaukee on the 8th and scored against Grand Rapids on the 22nd. So Gaunce with 5 goals in his last 7 games, and on the season all told, he's got 8 goals, 6 assists, 14 total points in the 21 games that he's played for the Iowa Wild. But before we continue to dive in, let's hear from Gaunce himself on his thoughts, including some thoughts on the Iowa Wild starting to pick things up here over the last couple of weeks.
With Brendan Gaunce, here we go, ready for your Minnesota Wild debut. Played a lot of hockey, but still, the fact is, game number 178 of your NHL career. But first with the Minnesota Wild, excitement level to get in there tonight?
Yeah, it'll for sure be there. It's always exciting, one, to play in the NHL. We're all pretty fortunate to play hockey for a living, and then some guys do this for a long time in the NHL, and some of us, might play 200, 300 games in the NHL. It's you never take it for granted, and I'm excited.
Speaking with John Hines, he says you're going to start on the wing, but you're comfortable wherever he throws you out there, even if you have to win a faceoff. Where are you most comfortable if you had your choice?
This year I've been playing a lot of center, but I feel confident in faceoffs, so that's one thing I'm pretty happy with. But honestly, wherever it's a forechecking game, the systems are kind of fluid, so you can if you're the first back, you're playing center anyways. So I feel comfortable in both.
Probably feels like a long time from September to December, but it sounded like training camp went really well for you, made an impression on the squad, and then finally get the opportunity here. Looking at the stats, it seems like things have been going very well in Iowa. How would you recap the first third of the season?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been, again, I think I said it before, but it's been an adjustment. Took a little bit to get used to, but at the same time, it's at the end of the day, it's hockey. Once you get comfortable with your teammates, your new coaching staff, you just kind of play, you get fluid with the game, and you get back to what you normally do. So I'm excited for tonight.
Give me just an update on what's going on there in Iowa, beyond just you, the team as a whole. I know it was a rocky start to the season, but it feels like you guys have been kind of picking up some steam here.
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously the start wasn't ideal, going 0-6-1, but seasons are long. You build off things that the coach is preaching and the habits that we want to build. And I think over the last month and a bit, you can see it kind of changing. and we're getting a little more comfortable in the system. We're relying more on our system rather than just trying to go score goals to win games. The goals are coming from good habits, coming from, being under the puck, the right play. And it's not just a home run play. It's kind of 1 shift, 2 shift, 3 shift goal. So I think that takes time, and I think we're showing it now.
Last thing then, I haven't gone back to look at the stats too closely, but of your 177 games in the NHL, do you have much experience here in St. Paul?
Maybe 4 or 5 times. Yeah. Not definitely not the most I played in, for sure.
So Gaunce will draw in on the fourth line tonight. Jesse Pierce with line rushes from earlier today in practice. Kaprizov, Rossi, Zuccarello, Johansson, Hartman, Boldy, Foligno, Goudreau, and Jones, Gaunce, Huznadinov, and Shore. On the defensive side, Brodin and Faber, Chisholm and Spurgeon, Merrill and Bogosian, with Dermott rotating in. And it's going to come down to the same things that allowed the Wild to beat the Florida Panthers in the first matchup between the two teams. There's no Alexander Barkov in that matchup, but the Panthers a little shorthanded in this one tonight, as Sam Bennett out due to illness. So that is a fortuitous bounce for the Minnesota Wild, but it will be interesting to see how Gaunce steps in, because Devin Shore has been a little more noticeable in a fourth-line role for the Minnesota Wild since he started drawing regular action in. It's if they can get any sort of secondary scoring from 2, 3, 4, that's going to go a long way, because that the top line is capable of going nuts. It's just a matter of who else can step up and be a dance partner for Kirill, Kaprizov, and company. But they're getting closer. The latest updates, Jakub Lauko is week to week with sounded like a core injury. A lot of core injuries for the Minnesota Wild over the last few years. Marcus Foligno obviously has had a couple, and now Jakub Lauko dealing with one. Yakov trending day to day. I think the latest update that I heard with him is that he just is beat up. So trying to work his way back. And really interesting on Philip Gustafsson. They continue to say day to day and try to lightly dance around the fact that basically what they're doing is they are testing Philip Gustafsson. Whatever the injury is, they're testing it and then seeing how he responds to ramp-ups to the injury. So take that for what it will. But it'll be Fleury tonight against the Panthers. And we'll see if Gustafsson is available for either of the two games this weekend against Utah and Winnipeg. If not, you're going to see Jesper again. And my guess is it would be Jesper on Friday and Fleury on Saturday against Winnipeg. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. And that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We've got a bonus episode coming for you here later this evening ahead of tonight's 9-ish puck drop against the Panthers. No postcast tonight, but we'll recap the game for you tomorrow. Make sure to hit the like button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.